welcome to our webinar today. The subject of the webinar is the Azure mistakes to avoid and how to fix them. So within the next sort of 30 minutes, we're just going to show you sometimes where Azure can go wrong, how we can try and help you dodge the most common issues that we see, and how to actually get more value from your Azure environment that you're already paying for. So moving swiftly on, just to introduce myself. So I'm Emma, I head up new business here at BCN, also head up the Microsoft relationship. So great to have you join us for this webinar today. Over to you, Josh.
Hello, my name's Josh. I'm the Azure specialist here at BCN. I've got about 18 years of experience leveraging bespoke applications into cloud architecture, whether that's Azure, AWS, GCP. Spent a lot of time around sort of enterprise architecture, looking at sort of well-architected framework, best practices, all the good buzzwords around sort of enterprise scalability, resilience, redundancy, and security. So that's me in a nutshell.
Over to you, Tanner.
Thanks, Emma. Before we get started, just a quick thank you to the BCN team for putting today's session together and everyone, of course, who's taking the time to join us today. I'm Tanner Turan, Microsoft Azure lead for UK and Ireland at Arrow, and I look forward to today's session.
Amazing. We're going to take you through what some of the biggest Azure misconceptions are, what we assume is happening versus what is actually true. We're going to look at some of the common mistakes that we see customers make. Sometimes, there's just the lift and shift, there's a cost associated with that, but where are you getting the real value? We're going to take you through a little bit about what does good look like, what are we seeing out there in the marketplace and with the architecture, and then we're going to give you some real world examples of some customers that we are working with or have worked with, and then there'll be a closing and next steps. Just to say, we are very happy to take questions at any time. There is a Q&A button at the top of the Teams meeting, so if anyone wants to pop a question in there, we'll try and answer them as we go along, or we'll leave a few minutes at the end if people have got questions, but feel free to either raise your hand or put a question in. So just from a kind of very high level summary then, so everything looks fine, you're in Azure, it's all looking good, but that doesn't actually mean it's working and working best for you. So everything may be live, but it doesn't mean that you're getting the real value from it. And the kind of key 4 areas that we see this across is rising costs. Are things switched off when they could be switched off? You don't need them 24/7. A lack of visibility. Are you able to actually see what's running where? What security and governance do you have around it? Absolutely critical these days. We're seeing security as an absolute key part of anyone's business. And have you got the architecture in place to ensure that you've got maximum security and governance? And then your resilience and recovery. Do you actually know if something were to go wrong, how you could get everything back up and running? So those are the kind of the 4 key areas that we really see on a day-to-day basis. I'm now going to hand over to Tanner, and he's now going to cover some of the biggest misconceptions. Over to you, Tanner.
Thanks, Emma. Before we dive into the further in the slide deck, talk about the common mistakes, I want to spend a couple of minutes on the beliefs that sits underneath them, because almost everything we are going to talk about later start as one of these main 6 assumptions. And I want to be clear, none of them are silly, especially if you're coming from a very traditional on-prem setup. So let's just walk through what those assumptions are. If you can move on to the next. Okay, all good. The first one is, I think the assumption is made that Microsoft manages everything. I think this is probably the most common one, and it's probably the most dangerous in my opinion, because it feels true, right? Because it's their platform, it's their data center. Surely they got it covered. But Azure runs on a shared responsibility model. So Microsoft secures a physical environment and keeps the platform available, and everything you build up on that, such as your data, your identity, who has access to what, and how it's configured, that's all down to your responsibility. The textbook example is that, a storage account or a database accidentally left open to the internet, there's actually not really a Microsoft outage, that's a configuration choice, so it lands back on the customer. So please hold on to this one because it comes back straight back when we talk about security. The next up is just the hosting platform, same as on-prem. This is partially true because you can absolutely treat Azure as somewhere you run virtual machines, a data center you rent by the hour. But the problem is that if that's all you do, you're actually paying cloud prices for an on-premise setup. And the real value is in the managed services that's sitting right next to those virtual machines, such as the database that you never have to patch, that auto scales with demands, the storage, the analytic and AI. You can just literally switch them on. If all you do is lift servers across and stop there, you will walk past all of those values. The third one is the migration equals optimization. So this one just catches a lot of people. So Josh will be doing a deeper dive into this actually. But in summary, getting into Azure or being in the Azure has essentially an end date, but optimizations doesn't. So please hold on to this as well, and we will take a detailed look in the further slides. The fourth one, the next one, my data is in Azure, so it is ready to use. It's accessible, but the data that sits in the storage account is a very long way from the data you can actually report on or analyze or feed into AI and make meaningful decisions based upon that data. So that needs the right architecture underneath it, and the structure, the governance, the right services must join up. Otherwise, all you have done is move the data where it lives without changing anything. The fifth one is a finance one, right? It's a CapEx just like before. So this actually is not true. So this one is a finance one that trips up a lot of budgets. So think of it this way. When you're on-prem, you're essentially buying the hardware, the routers, the switches, the big servers, big storage. You make one big capital purchases every few years, and they're typically then sit in the corner. But when you move into the cloud, you're actually renting everything. So the capital expense becomes much more operational expense. So you pay what you consume, a bit like utility bills. So every single day, that's not really a bad thing, but it does mean that you have to actively manage that, because probably nobody used to watch the electricity meter on a server that you've already paid for. But when you're in the cloud, the meter is running the whole time, so it needs a close watch. The final one, the last one, is moving into Azure automatically saves you money, or the cloud is cheaper. Sometimes it does save money and sometimes it doesn't, right? So the cloud hands you the options such as scaling up or down, the agility, the right sizing, switching off what you're not using. But if you don't, but it won't pull them for you. So if you just lift and shift, you will actually may see an increase in your bill. The savings come entirely from how you run it, and that's exactly the rest of the session is all about.
Amazing. Thanks, Tanner. Really good insight. So handing over to you, Josh, to take us through some of the common mistakes we see.
Yeah, so just to expand on the misconception piece that Tanner's just gone through, I'm going to explore some of the more common mistakes that we see within Azure. So on to the first one. So here, lifting and shifting isn't the finishing line. So what this slide represents is basically migrating your infrastructure into the cloud, into Azure. Everything works just like it did when it was on-prem. Now, this isn't a bad thing. It's not a wrong methodology around this. It's just a way of actually utilizing Azure. So effectively, you could have come from aging hardware that's dying on-prem, and you needed to move at speed and push into Azure. You might have been experiencing sort of a data center exit, and you needed to come out of the data center and go to a new option. And you effectively carried everything that you had on-prem and that traditional architecture type into the cloud, and you've replicated exactly what you did have before in the cloud, which is very much more of a traditional architecture type, a traditional way of doing IT and sort of designing your solution. So that's absolutely valid. But what we'd like to see is actually start moving away from the traditional architecture types and moving into sort of cloud architecture. That way you can actually experience some of more of the benefits around Azure, which Tanner's already covered. Effectively, you'll then be able to sort of lower your legacy tech debt. You'll be able to get control over your sort of cost optimization, see where your resources are, what your resources are doing, being able to move at more speed going forward as well. So effectively, it allows you to work towards a more scalable and more resilient and more secure environment going forward. On to the next stage. So here, we touched on sort of costs and cost visibility in the last slide. I did mention it slightly, but it's one of the biggest pain points we see with our customers, and actually understanding what's costing me in Azure, why am I spending so much money, and am I actually getting the true value out of Azure that I should be doing for the money I'm spending. So some of the things that we can do and can explore around sort of moving towards a more cloud architecture, a more modern approach is, if you're taking traditional VMs and moving sort of to PaaS resources, so platform as a service resource, you can actually start building that out as auto-scaling. So you can effectively, instead of provisioning a large VM and you have your peaks and troughs effectively as you go and experience over the course of a month, over the course of a year, what you could do is actually reduce the size of that, push it down to sort of a smaller resource type, put an auto-scaling plan in place, and then when it does peak up, for those short periods that it does peak up, it spins up additional resource, and you don't have to do that yourself. It does it all automatically in the background. but then you're actually only paying for what you're using. So effectively, you've right-sized your resource. So you're not paying for a dedicated resource across a whole entire year or a whole entire month. And that sort of then comes into sort of the second point around right-sizing as well. So we've effectively right-sized your resource in Azure to actually be, and it'll actually work more for you instead of you going, right, I've got a 10 core with 20 gig RAM, and I need because a couple of days of the month, I'm at sort of 90% capacity, but the rest of the time I'm at 10% capacity. So therefore, why pay for that resource across the entirety of the month instead of just paying for it when you actually need it? And then on the next point in this box as well, it's the reservation. So on here, some of your sort of long-standing resources that you have in Azure and that you've used, and you on pay as you go into it, you can actually apply reservations around that resource. So with reservations, you're effectively signing up to say, I'm going to use this resource for the next 1 or 3 years. Now, with that, you can actually experience up to 60% savings depending on the resource going forward as well. So then again, we're then driving your costs down. So you're not just paying for something in Azure, we're trying to give you a cost optimization. We're trying to drive your costs down. So we've seen that. Switched off the unused. So here, you might have some resource here that you're paying for that traditionally you just sat on a VM on-prem. It's there, it's working away, but you only actually ever use it to run reports 1 week of the month. If it's off for 3 weeks of the month, you might as well turn it off. And then when you turn it off, you're not paying for it. You're just paying for the storage account within Azure. So you're not actually paying for the resource or the compute that it uses. And then you can actually auto schedule that to turn on and off when you need it. So if it was the last week of the month and you wanted for reports, we could actually schedule that to turn on, spin up. It's there, it's working. And then after that week, it'll turn itself off. And then that way you're not paying for it for 4 weeks of the month, 4 or 5 weeks of the month. You're actually only paying for it for 1 week of the month. So you've actually reduced your cost by 3/4 effectively on that side. Another thing we see within sort of Azure is coming across to Azure and understanding if you have hybrid assurance already on premise, you can actually bring some of your software licenses, your Microsoft licenses with you into Azure and apply that. Because you already paid for it once, there's no need to pay for it again. And within Azure, you can effectively tick a box, say, I've got this software license, I don't need to be charged for it again, and it will reduce your OpEx costs going forward as well. So therefore, you're not paying twice for something as well there. Okay, next common misconception or common mistake is sort of secure by design, but not by default. So here we see a lot of, we've moved into Azure, Microsoft does all the security for us, we're all good for security because they look after it. Now, that's true in the sense of Microsoft looks after the actual hardware and the host that your services are running on, because they have abstracted that layer away from you. They've taken that management of the physical box effectively away from you. And then you're only paying for sort of running the OSs, the resource SQL databases, app services, and so on, so going forward. However, that doesn't mean it's secure by default. It just means the underlying layer is secure because Microsoft looks after it. We still need to design sort of the network, the resources, Cloud Defender, identity, role-based permissions, least privilege. We design everything with sort of zero trust in mind to protect your actual environment. So just because you have moved into Azure doesn't mean it's necessarily secure. We still need to actually protect everything around that. On to the next slide. So resilience and recovery aren't switched on by default. So on this, I see this quite a fair bit as well, especially in the 365 space as well, is we've moved into the cloud, everything's backed up, it's in the cloud. I don't have to worry about backup. I don't have to worry about my disaster recovery because it's in the cloud. Now, Microsoft are very good. They do have periods of downtime. We've all experienced sort of some service degradation within Azure, whether that's sort of Copilot 365 or some of the Azure resources. So it's not a case of it's always up, it's always running. It is a case of effectively you're in Azure, it's there, it's working, but on that off chance that the data center goes down or where the regions go down, what is your disaster recovery? Or if you've been breached into, or you've had a cyber attack and someone's come in and deleted all your resources, how then do you spin that resource back up? So Just because it's in Azure doesn't mean it's backed up, and it doesn't mean that there is a disaster recovery in place. However, being in Azure does mean that it's not a traditional sense of disaster recovery where you have to go sort of active, pay for one load of servers, then another load of servers, and then replicate them across the two. Within Azure and going forward sort of cloud architecturally, you can actually layer that sort of disaster recovery and resilience into that. So it always starts with a bit of backup. So Azure backup. On the Azure backup, we can basically enable soft delete, immutable backup, so that if you ever had a breach, that's protected. You can always recover from a backup. But then it comes down to sort of risk appetite. So when it comes to sort of business continuity and disaster recovery, it depends on how much risk you want to take on. What is your business criticality? We can actually target specific applications within your tech stack and go, if you have this go down, how long can you have this down for? Is it 4 hours? Is it 6 hours? Or is it a couple of days? And then we can actually make a disaster recovery plan around your core business applications, not just everything. So we can target specific things and we can move that out. And also what I'd like to say is when it comes to some of this is we actually get the balance between sort of the value of the disaster recovery and the cost of the disaster recovery as well, because you're not paying for duplicating resources. There are other things in Azure that we can leverage, sort of like Azure Site Recovery, where effectively it replicates the storage account of those resources across to another region. But it doesn't mean that the resources actually spun up in another region. Effectively, that means that you're not going to be paying for the compute. So the secondary region will be at a lower cost than your primary region. So you're not necessarily duplicating the cost when it comes to disaster recovery. Okay, I think on to the next slide. So being in Azure versus getting value from Azure. So we've touched on this slide a fair bit already, going through some of the slides, but this is also sort of around sort of the modernization piece. And understanding that bringing in traditional VMs, you still have to sort of manage the OS, you still have to secure the OS, you still have to look after what that attack surface looks like effectively. However, moving into sort of modernized applications and sort of PaaS services, we abstract that layer away from yourselves, and you're basically then just looking after that resource itself. So take a SQL, for example. I would normally sort of run on a Windows or Linux VM, and you then have to patch, secure, monitor, and look after that VM itself, whilst also looking after the SQL. Whereas if you move to a Azure SQL, for example, it takes that whole management layer away from you, and then you can just focus purely on what that database does. Okay, and the well-architected framework. So I've mentioned this a couple of times. I thought just to cover this off, just in case anyone wasn't sure what this was. Basically, the Azure Well-Architected Framework is Microsoft's best practice and guidance around sort of designing and reviewing your Azure estate. It gives us a structured way of looking at the Azure environment, whether it's in a good standing, whether it's secure, whether it's resilient, whether it's cost effective, and it can actually move at pace. It can handle change. So it's built around 5 key pillars. You can see the 5 key pillars on the screen, which are the security, reliability, cost optimization, operational excellence, and performance efficiency. These pillars basically help us make sure the Azure environment is not just deployed, but designed properly. Is it secure? Is it resilient? Is it cost effective? Can it be operated consistently? Can it scale when the business needs it to? That structure gives us a practical way to assess whether Azure is set up properly and where improvements can be made. And it also gives you yourselves confidence that the platform has been designed to the best practice, has the right foundations, it's got all the right building blocks in place. You can move faster, you can scale more safely, and understand what's happening across your Azure estate as well.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. That's some really good insight. So obviously what we've gone through so far is we've recapped what the common assumptions and mistakes may well be. What we're now going to do is move on to like the art of the possible. So what does good look like? So I'm going to hand back to Tanner for this part. Over to you, Tanner.
Thanks, Sam. Really useful insights from Josh as well. So I think that when people ask about, what a good looks like in Azure, I think the answer is always, my answer always is consistent, right? So it's not about always having the latest technology or completing a certain migration project. I think the well-run Azure estate, as Josh definitely dive into this, is that having a good habits and repeating them consistently. So, on this slide, we picked 4 marks of a healthy Azure estate, and I'll walk you through them. The first one to look after is visibility. So you can't manage what you can't see. Most organizations I see that don't, struggle because they lack in technology. I think they struggle because nobody has a complete view of what's running, who owns it, and what is there, and what is it costing them. So the good governance gives you that clarity. It turns Azure essentially from a black box into something you can actively manage. The next one is the cost optimization. Again, we've done a brilliant job in the previous slides going through this, but I don't mean, cutting services. I mean, making sure every pound you spend is delivering value back to the business. So most successful customers aren't necessarily the ones that spend the least. With Azure, they're technically the ones who understand where the money is going and regularly adjusting their environments as the priorities change. The third one, security. Again, Josh has perfectly explained this in the previous slide. Building security into your Azure environment from day one reduces the risk and avoid definitely the costs of repair works later on, and helps the business move faster with confidence. The final one, we repeat this a couple of times already, so hopefully you get the message. Finally, the continuous improvement. Azure isn't a project, you start and you finish and you walk away from it. So a healthy Azure estate for me, it's not a destination. It's a cycle of visibility, a cycle of optimization, a security, a continuous improvement. The businesses that embrace that mindset consistently see better performance, lower risk, and of course a stronger return on investment from their cloud investments. The next slide. So this is probably a good slide to kind of give you visibility in terms of where the customers are in their journey. So the biggest mindset I think we're trying to get customers to change in their what they see is getting workloads into Azure. It's not a finish line. It's actually the starting line. First phase is simply getting out of your data center and into the cloud. That immediately removes a lot of the hardware management and, of course, the refresh cycles, which we talk about, and essentially environment headaches that you're currently dealing with. Once you move into Azure, it doesn't automatically make things cheaper, secure, or more efficient, but there is definitely value to be unlocked there. The next comes, again, the stabilization. Once you're in there, this is where you start understanding the cost, tightening up the security, identifying anything that wasn't quite configured during migration, perhaps. Think of it as getting the house in order before you make the next improvements. The next one is the optimization. This is where we start really asking that type of questions internally. Are we using the right services? Are the resources oversized? Are we paying for the things that nobody needs? This is actually where the customer discovers some of the quickest wins and biggest cost savings. The next one, then they move into the modernization, right? Instead of running old system in a new location, now you can begin to take advantage of cloud native services, right? Applications are easier to manage, more resilient, and often cheaper to operate as well. This is where you start seeing benefits that simply weren't possible in a traditional data center. And last one, of course, when we get to the innovation, this is where Azure becomes a growth platform rather than just an IT platform. The data, the AI, analytic automation, and new customer experience becomes possible when you build a strong foundation first.
Amazing. Thanks, Tanner. And then we're just going to give you a little bit of high-level insight into some of the things we've been doing with a couple of customers. So back over to you, Josh.
Got to take myself off mute. Yeah, absolutely. So we've got 3 examples here just to run through very quickly. Some of them are anonymized. The last one's not anonymized. We've actually got permission for that one. So on this one here, this first example, effectively what we were talking about is moving into Azure. It's all under one subscription. It becomes very difficult to manage everything under one subscription. So what we did for this customer is we actually took that subscription, we started carving it out, started to push into sort of multiple subscriptions in line with some of the well-architected framework, making it sort of a modular by design as well. That allowed that customer to effectively move more at pace, because one of their biggest pain points was that they had naturally grown to the point where they were still developing, but they got to a point where they didn't know how to apply that to their applications and how that would have an impact to the wider environment. And they were worried that if they did start developing and start changing some of the solutions, some of the resources in there, what impact it has to the wider environment. So what we did, we carved it up, popped it all into their own subscriptions, divided it by workload, and now they are moving at a much faster pace. They understand exactly where all their resources are and how to leverage their resources going forward as well. It has also brought their cost massively under control because they had a lot of legacy tech debt. They had resources that they just weren't using going forward. And on this one, so on this example here, we did exactly the same as the previous example. However, here we utilized a sort of DevOps and DevOps infrastructure as code using Terraform. So what we did here is actually not only have we sorted out that environment and split that environment up within line with well-architected framework, put all the best practice in, all the governance, all the guardrails. It's also here about how we manage that going forward, because we can get to a point in time where it's all working, it's all lovely and right in the best practices. But as you're developing and going forward, how do you keep to those best practices? So we utilize and manage the infrastructure as code, and that keeps all the guardrails, all the policies and everything in place. It also means that developers, when they're actually going to spin up new resources, they can actually template out dev environments, they can deploy dev environments on demand, but also they don't have to worry about how long it takes them to build that environment. They have a golden standard to go back to, but it also means that they can't go and touch the production environment with dev resources or start building across environments, because the Terraform will not allow them to do that effectively. And so this is the last one. This is the non-anonymized one. Here, basically, we did something very similar, but we actually moved the customer from on-prem into Azure. They had over 100 servers. We actually reduced their server count by about 68%. So they're now running their applications across 32 resources within Azure. We've improved their disaster recovery massively as well. I think we got it down to less than 1 hour. So if there was an issue and we did have to actually flick the switch, it takes less than an hour for us to bring up a new environment with all their resources running and working correctly. This has saved a lot of man hours as well. So when we're talking to their IT team around the management, how many tickets they were getting, where they actually were trying to dive into their resources and understand where things were, they were spending an inordinate amount of time doing that. By reducing that state, by putting it to best practice to actually modernize some of those applications, we've reduced that man hours and that IT effort right down as well. And also when it comes to the costs over a 5-year period, we actually reduced their current spend by 200k. So we saved them 200k going forward by moving into Azure.
Amazing, really compelling stuff, Josh. Thank you. So back over to you, Tanner, for our final couple of summary slides.
Yeah, so I think throughout the session, we talk about some of the common mistakes that we see, and in this slide, hopefully, you get the picture that the Azure isn't just somewhere place to put services. It can do that, but there's a lot more value to unlock. So essentially, if you're wondering where to start, it really comes down to 3 simple areas for us. First, get your visibility into your environments so you understand what's running and where the opportunities are. The second one is make sure the costs are aligned to the business value rather than simply what was migrated. And the last one is the governance, the right governance and security foundation in place so the environments can grow safely. Even if you just can do these 2 things well, then you're off to a great start.
Brilliant. And then finally, my favorite part of my job is spending Microsoft's money. So just give us a little bit of an overview onto this, Tanner.
Absolutely. So before I kind of dive into each section, actually, it's important to mention that all funding programs are subject to eligibility of workloads and, of course, the Microsoft approval, because they do change over time and sometimes can be time bound as well. So it's always worth double checking. So the best thing to do is probably to kind of reach out with your BCN account manager after today's session, who can walk you through and see what's currently available for your specific migration or scenario. So based on what we covered today, there are funding opportunities available across multiple stages of your Azure journey. If you're at the very early stages, who are still exploring options, there are fundings available most of the time for discovery or proof of value engagements to help you better understand and identify opportunities before you build, plan a larger commitment, larger project. The next one is the migration priority. There might be funding available to support moving certain workloads into Azure, essentially helping you reduce some of the upfront cost associated with that journey. The next one is the customers they're establishing Azure. So once you're in Azure, we're also seeing a lot of programs focused on modernization, whether that's around data, analytic, AI, or building a stronger foundation for future innovations. And the final one is, again, there are additional incentives and offers available for certain Azure Fabric data cases, which can help accelerate projects further where the criteria are met. So the key message is this, I think, if funding can help you minimize the cost of migration or shorten timelines or make a project easier to justify internally, it's always worth having the conversation. So please do reach out to your BCN account manager after today's sessions, and we can explore what opportunities may be available to support your Azure journey. Thank you.
Thank you. And conscious we're at the end of our allotted time. Look, it's a really key area for us. there's so much more to be gained, so much more value to be gained from Azure environments. We would love to offer out to you as you've joined the webinar today. Look, let's do that initial assessment. Let's see if we can help. Let's see if there are areas that could either make it, more productive, more secure, or more cost optimized. And genuinely, the 3 examples that we gave you, Microsoft funding definitely helped towards that. So let's see if that's something that can also help. But just want to double check there are no questions. Just press the Q&A button if there are. I haven't seen any come through, but Tanner in particular, it's been wonderful for you to have joined us from Arrow today. Thank you for your support, and Josh, as always, thank you for your insights and experience, and for everyone that's joined.